Well, hello everyone and welcome. I'm Dr. Tiffany Mullen. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Vytal Health, and I'm a practicing physician as well, functional and integrated medicine physician. And I'm so psyched because I have Dr. Seema Afsari here, fellow DO. Woo!
Yeah.
Wonderful functional medicine doctor, integrated medicine doctor here in Wisconsin. And I have always had such deep admiration for you and your practice and the way that you treat patients. And particularly what I want to talk about today, which is what I brought you to the proverbial video table for, is to talk about the idea of spring cleaning your soul. So
Hmm.
the idea of I always feel this sense of renewal, like around this time of year, March, April, May, when we start to see the clouds aren't there as much, the snow starts to melt. I start to see little green things popping up in my yard. And the robins come back, which is really huge. Like that's huge for me. And there's this sense of like, okay, how do I do better? How do I bring forth a better version of myself, a sort of spring cleansed version of myself into the next part of the year before we kind of go into that sort of dormant stage again at the end of the year. So,
Great.
welcome to you, Dr.
Thank you. I'm excited to talk about this. This is one of my
Yeah,
favorite topics,
I know.
transitions,
Yeah.
sort of unfolding and unraveling the stuff that gets, kind of convoluted and buried away. So I really enjoy that. Um, and I also agree, spring sort of has that nature. I mean, that's, it symbolizes rebirth. We celebrate it culturally and religiously, but also ancient healthcare practices like Ayurveda in India, believe that every transition to a new season is an opportunity to reconnect with parts of you that are feeling either imbalanced or stagnant or even depressed. Especially Midwest winters like ours can be dark and cloudy and cold, and that has its purpose too. It allows us to hibernate and sort of withdraw a little bit to feed, and comfort and nourish and restore. But then spring allows us this ability to metaphorically and literally clean out our closets. And there's a lot of things that we can do to sort of, piggyback on nature's reminder that change is coming and transitions are coming.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's so funny when you said that. I was like, you think of bears hibernating, they're kind of the classic hibernating animal. And what the reason is for hibernation is obviously for conservation of energy, right? They just hunker down and they hardly move around so they don't burn a calorie. And I think that's kind of what winter is like for humans too. We hibernate, at least in this part of the country. We hibernate, we conserve our energy, so that when we go out into the cold we can manage to survive it. So I guess in that way we're kind of like bears.
Yeah, we're very much like bears. We have a lot of connection to the natural world, and again, spring is a good reminder
Good.
about that. Like I really enjoy my little ones did nature preschools, and they would
Mhm.
always around this time do their hikes about searching for signs of spring. And like I said, those gentle reminders that we are part of the earth in the same cyclic way is really humbling and grounding.
Absolutely.
Um, and I came from I moved from a part of the country where seasons were sort of blurred into one long basically summer, which sounds like a dream, but I've come to appreciate going through the various changes all the time. And spring is one of the ones that I think can be a tricky one. I think, fall to winter, we get a little like, okay, it's about to get cold. We're about to, not see each other as much. But winter to spring is sort of like shaking off, shaking off the layers literally, and re-emerging as, not better version of yourself, that putting together all of the thoughts in your mind of how can I support a happier, healthier, more fruitful life. It's a good time to do that, but it's not easy.
Yeah. So how do you help your patients who maybe, and I have a lot of these patients, and I have this myself, who have a little bit of a seasonal affective disorder, who have been yearning for sunshine, have been sort of searching for the light and looking for signs of spring, but they're still feeling a little dark, and and we're not going to talk about necessarily clinical depression, but we're talking about sort of more low mood, low energy. They've they sort of they haven't felt it yet. They don't really know exactly how to get back into, dusting themselves off, shedding the layers. How do you in your practice with your patients, how do you start that conversation, and what kind of things are you talking about?
Good question, because I think everybody knows, like, I should probably get outside. I should probably get moving. I should probably like focus back on eating the rainbow. But there's something that kind of is in the way of making those good decisions for yourself. So I'm a big proponent of finding a grounded practice, a grounded practice on a regular basis, and just committing to a small, approachable habit that kind of gets your mind right. It gets you in the right mental space to embrace transition, because transitions are also a type of stress. Not all stress
Yeah,
is a
for sure.
bad thing.
Mhm.
Physiologically, stress is designed to allow us to survive. And thankfully, we're more like bears as opposed to running away from bears, um,
Right.
in our current state of affairs. And so we don't need to be, dealing with the kind of stressors that we used to, but we have sort of transformed into our own new, perhaps culturally created stressors. And transitions are a type of stress that sort of rocks the homeostasis, the
Yeah.
the sort of equilibrium. We're moving, we're transitioning.
Yeah.
And so what I like to talk to patients about is finding that grounded practice. I can, till I'm blue in the face, talk about, like, these are the phytonutrients and all of the foods that you can eat that can support your energy and balance your hormones and heal your gut and do all of these things. But truly having a practice to sort of set your intentions is the first step. And it's something that is approachable. And it also just creates this um, commitment to self-care. So I like the idea of, I often tell patients, okay, tell me your day. Tell me everything about what you're doing from the moment you wake up till the moment you go to bed. And if they're honest, there's a lot of like, okay, I wake up and I'm on my phone for a little bit, like before I get out of bed, or, something like that. And I'm like, okay, what if we shift things by 10 minutes and introduce just a new, 10 minutes is not going to be severely deleterious to your sleep, hopefully. I mean, I know how precious that can be, even 10 minutes.
That's my
But
first news, Seema.
yeah. But just waking up and starting the day with something grounding, even if it's just like one sun salutation on your yoga mat, or it's again just a reminder of an intention. Something grounding can kind of lay the foundation for your moods and your behaviors for the rest of the day.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
So that one step, that one habit, I think that's so, it seems like it's such a simple idea, but it's so powerful, right? I mean, especially when we allow ourselves not to make that a federal production. So, so when
Exactly.
you say a 10-minute insertion of a new idea, a new something, you mentioned sun salutations in yoga, and not everybody does yoga, actually. I don't, but I know what a sun salutation is. What are some of the other things that you might be able to suggest to people as something that will allow them to take that small step forward, that doesn't feel totally overwhelming, that doesn't disrupt their valuable time, which is one of the things I think that keeps people from doing this. I just don't have time to do it. There's too many things going on. What are some of the things that you suggest to patients that can be potentially game changers, but little things that they can do?
Sure. Well, I'm a big advocate for mindfulness-based
Mhm.
practice. And so yoga is just one version of that. There are many, many, many versions. And I think when sometimes people hear the word meditation, and you kind of get a little like, I don't know, sitting is not for me. I'm a moving person. I have so many things to do. I can't even imagine sitting. And I'm like, well, you're the perfect person to maybe start thinking about
People say
sitting,
that to me
because
all the time. I don't know why.
me too, um but I feel like anything that connects you with the present moment can be a version of mindfulness, because it's again just removing you from the rigmarole, the like inevitably never ending task list and the deadlines and tax season and
Oh,
all of the things that also tend to culminate around this time. It just pulls you away from a moment, and the intention behind that is to create a little bit of space, a little bit of mental space, a little bit of energetic space for
mhm.
yourself. And so We talk about I do deep breathing exercises on a regular basis. We talk about just like focusing on the breath. You could do, counted breaths, you can do mantra type stuff, you
Prayer,
can,
different types of
yeah,
prayer, if you have
you can turn your favorite song on in the morning and move your body like,
yeah,
in a
right,
silly way, like no one's watching. But the idea is you're committing to this shifting of your routine for
right.
the purpose of, sort of drudging up the old and, out with the old and in with the new. That's one example. I'm also a proponent of things like, journaling or writing down intentions. I'm really, the act of going through that is really transformative. So I appreciate that as well.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I was just thinking about, you and I both trained in medical acupuncture.
Hmm.
And one of the things I remember from learning about acupuncture was this idea of heart energy,
Hmm.
in a Chinese medicine way of thinking about things. The heart energy, when it's channeled in a positive way, oh, you think, love, good regard for people, and all of that's true. But really, directing heart energy, what I remember from acupuncture, and it's been a few years, was creativity. And
Hmm.
so when I felt like there were people who were stuck, and I've been this person too, there was something about doing something creative that would kind of unblock that sense of being stuck. So even if you just got like some clay, like like molding clay, and made little, I did this once, I made little sculptures, like tiny little sculptures, or got one of those coloring books for adults, or something where, and it's not about being artistic, and it's not necessarily about being like really good at it. It's just about like exercising some form of creativity, music, dancing, visual arts, hands-on stuff, to allow that kind of unstuckness in the heart energy, that motivational piece to emerge. Do you
I
ever
really,
think acupuncture?
I do. I really
Yeah,
like that. And I do talk to patients a lot about, I'll ask them, what do you do that brings you joy? They're
yeah,
like, oh, I
right.
read, I talk to friends, this and that. I said, but what is something that you used to do on a regular basis that you loved, that you just, maybe I should go revisit that sometime. And it's amazing to see like how many patients have amazing talents and skills and interests, like reupholstering furniture or whittling wood, or I mean, there's
Yes.
such people making jewelry. Anything that sort of is grounding with your hands, I think is also, yeah, exactly that. Creative juices start to
Yeah,
flow and kind of get, reminded of the part of you that sort of gets pushed aside. Because I think sometimes we also see creative time as a luxury.
yeah, totally.
Like I don't have time to paint. I have this, again, the to-do list. But I think it's also about understanding the value of that and what it can bring um,
Absolutely.
to the table.
It's a deeply human endeavor, right? I mean, this is what differentiates us from the bears, at least from our observation, is that they're not painting and sculpting and making music. And I mean, maybe they are in their own way, but like we as human beings are, I think we are born makers. We want to make things. We want to make beauty. We want to, those are things that I think are natural parts of being a human being that we tend to devalue. To your point, like we tend to say like, oh, I don't have time for that. That's a small, that's too big of an ask. Like, that's not a good thing for me to spend my time doing.
Right. And by invigorating that sense of creativity that's
Mhm.
inherently human, and it also is a delivery mechanism for, raw emotion and raw experience sometimes. And so some of the whole spring cleaning motivation is also, what are habits that aren't serving us
Yeah,
anymore? What are those, what's that little voice in our head that kind of we push away to the side, because the power of habit is very strong. The brain, you give it the same thing to do a certain number of times, and then you don't even have to think about it
right. It's
anymore.
hooked.
That's the fun thing, right? You just do. But sometimes that can be um,
Yeah,
not as self-serving. So creativity also allows us to sort of work with emotional processing
yeah,
too, and allows us space to reveal, you know, I have this idea in mind, like I want to be, ready for the beach this summer or whatever it is. I mean, that's
yeah.
that's a pretty typical, I would say,
Well, it sounds nice.
motivation. Yeah, me too. Me too. That's why it came up to my head right away. But, so how do I get there? Like, what are the things that are getting in the way and why, So it also just kind of gives you a space to reflect, on habits and
Right.
emotions that can be transformative.
Absolutely. Yes. Things that aren't serving us, people that aren't serving us, experiences aren't serving us. So many people are unhappy with their jobs or things like that. Getting yourself unstuck in this small way can potentially unstick a lot of those other things that feel like so enormous to take on, like, oh, gotta switch jobs. It's too scary and too hard and too difficult. But I think if just putting that one little piece in can be that first domino, and get things moving along. Uh,
Absolutely.
One of the things I think it's important to talk about, I think when we're talking about the spring cleaning of the soul piece, is getting some of the physical manifestations of barriers um, out of the way too. And by that I mean, if you haven't been somebody who has been moving regularly through the winter time for whatever reason, moving may be painful or hard. If you're somebody who hasn't been sleeping well because of the light being different, and the fact that it gets dark at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, um, maybe looking at managing your sleep better. And this is, one of the things that I feel particularly proud about in functional medicine, is that we're just really good at understanding those kind of problems, not just physical ones, but ones that have a physical piece, but they also have a spiritual, emotional piece as well. So maybe
Yeah.
pick a topic in your practice where you're dealing with somebody who has anxiety or depression or fatigue or insomnia or something, and sort of how do you look at them on that sort of full person perspective that is so kind of germane to the way that we practice in functional medicine?
Really good question. I mean, there's a lot there, but if I were to sort of break it down, simply, it would be those kind of four major pillars in my mind. I always talk about like the four, legs to the table or chair, or anything structural. Um, so sleep, stress, food, and movement. Those are, I mean, that's as basic as it really gets. And of course, we expand a lot in functional medicine. We really, really get into. I know, like, I know what my patients eat all day long. You know what I mean? In a really wonderful way. I love to learn about that.
Mhm.
But I talk about those four sort of major categories. And I begin, though, with the idea of sort of the spiritual self, because I think it's difficult to navigate any of those, and, to improve any of those areas if we are not, feeling whole for whatever reason. So I discuss that. That's where the practice comes in. And then we kind of go through each of those. So as far as sleep is concerned, transitions, daylight savings, all of the travel. These are big disruptors to our habits, and insomnia or sleep dysfunction tends to be increasingly problematic the older we get. I mean, our the time it takes to sleep is longer, the amount of time we spend in deep sleep is shorter, and the restorative piece is less likely there if you're getting up for a variety of reasons. And so we try to work with a balance of cortisol and melatonin, and we talk about what are ways to balance cortisol levels, which is a hormone that's produced in the adrenal glands, and it's basically one of the key hormones that manages our response to stress in the body. Now, this is like real or perceived stress, right? And stress, again, can be good and bad. Travel is stressful, but it's also very nourishing sometimes. And so one thing is to, like I said, wake up a little earlier, find a way to allow sunlight to wake you up, and try not to snooze through that. Healthy cortisol and melatonin patterns begin the moment, your eyes wake up, or sunlight sort of is received by your retina. And so following that, and not just sort of snoozing your way through optimal morning times, can do a lot. Creating good sleep hygiene practices are really, really crucial. So, we're addicted to these guys, we're addicted to our screens. We have, we, in a way, we have to be connected, but we also can maybe overindulge in that. And so I really try to, how can we work your work schedule and your life schedule so that you're not ending every night with a lot of screen time?
Yeah.
And just kind of doing things that allow for winding down. And so we talk a little bit about that. As far as exercise is concerned, there are all sorts of exercises out there. There's a lot of benefit of, interval training to kind of get the metabolism moving, but not everybody is able to do that. And so I always tell people, like, what are the kind of ways you like to move? What movement will bring you is comfortable for you? And if it's a walk, wonderful. Like,
Yeah.
let's figure out how you can go outside and get some much needed vitamin D that, we lack over the winter. And then just, again, a reinvigoration of dietary processes, like, relating to food, connecting with food in a way, which is why I love Ayurvedic practice a lot, because Ayurvedic teachings, the ancient Indian healthcare system, because it is very much like our connection to the earth is related to foods that are in season and abundance in the earth. And so, gardening is one way also to, what kind of things would you like to grow? What kind of things do you always buy that you can just, turn it into a hobby? And, I'm someone who was like, I have a literal brown thumb, metaphorical. I mean,
Unless she's out there weeding, then her
poor plants, they don't really stand too much of a chance. I mean, I'm doing better, but even someone like me can be like, well, here's some soil, here's some seeds, and let's just see what happens, because there's something kind of, helpful about being part of your nourishing process.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And then stress, of course, we sort of have talked about a little bit, that can be shifted by a lot of behavioral patterns, as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And measuring it, I think so. One of the things I always want to say to this audience and to anybody who's watching this is just, and I'm saying this to myself too, as I'm saying this, like, ask for help. Like, we don't have to do these things alone. We don't have to struggle with sleep or struggle with stress or struggle with the motivation to exercise or the joint discomfort that you have that may be keeping you from exercising, or the plan around losing the weight that would be necessary for you to move more comfortably. Don't do those things alone. That's why we have these incredible practitioners, not just at Vital Health, but across, all of functional integrative medicine in all modalities, to help, get some of these problems out of the way so that you can actually go forth and, do things in a positive way. So it's that, again, back to the first step of saying to somebody, I need help with my sleep, or my stress is way, way, way too high, and I feel like it's causing me such profound fatigue. Looking at cortisol specifically and measuring it so that we know where people are, and to a certain extent measuring melatonin too. I almost think of them as these opposite, one's coming down, the other's going up, and there's this beautiful rhythm and dance between cortisol and melatonin.
Yeah.
Those can be evaluated and addressed appropriately so that you can have a personalized treatment approach to your own particular, stress rhythms. But you're right, it's not just about like supplements and medicine. It's also about what's got you there in the first place. How are the stressors that you are dealing with, maybe something that you don't necessarily have to spend all your time thinking about, the perceived part, right? This perceived stress, the records that we spin in our heads that play these, situations that bother us over and over and over again, instead of giving our brains a break, because our adrenals are like, all right, well, for all they know, it's happening. It's happening now. You're actually having that argument with somebody, right?
Yeah, right. And you're so right. I mean, I always tell a lot of the patients, I think, that are drawn to our practice, have spent hours probably online, researching, and I never, I never scoff at that, because, that is you trying to advocate for yourself. But you can really, your mind can swim with all of the various information pieces that are out there, but also the various, like, nodes, various parts of our health and balance that are there. So I always say to patients, like, sometimes they'll get kind of overwhelmed, or they'll say like, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelming you with all of my things. And I'm like, no. Give it all to me. And then you release it. Cause like, let me do the processing. Let me do the plan. Let me come up with approachable ways for you to see how it's all connected. And all I ask for patients is to be open and to be willing. And they, obviously they come because they are, but I also like that idea of, give me the stress of trying to figure out the what and the why.
Yes.
And you kind of, work on reflecting on your own life and finding connections in your life and relationships that are supportive for you, so do something with a friend or a family member instead of like the typical let's go grab a cocktail for happy hour, let's have a standing walking date, or
Right.
do something moving, shift it so that it doesn't always kind of come to the same cultural mediated habits that are not always supportive, like we don't always have to eat and drink together. I mean, it's a wonderful thing to do,
Yeah.
but that's another way to invite mutual healthful practices.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true. That's so true, especially in this part of the country where that is a big part of our culture, right?
Yes.
American culture in general, but and actually, as I say that, that's really global. People come together for meals and that kind of thing. But yeah, I think you're right. I think switching that up a little bit, still being able to have the time and the contact with somebody that you want to be around, but not necessarily in an unhealthy way.
Yeah, and just to switch it up, again, our brain likes that. I had a patient recently who was talking about, letting go of a habit that's been present for decades. And so some of the advice I've given her, and I have a very strong interest in just neurocognitive behavioral science. I just love why we do what we do and how we interact with one another and this earth. But changing just a little bit about your routine allows for, the relinquishing of a habit to be less grand. Like you mentioned, this like
Totally.
big, do this with your left, put your left shoe on first, or, do it like little
So
tricks that you
true. It seems so
do.
silly, but it's
So
true.
silly, like, have this before that, or take a sip of this before that. I mean, little tiny pieces of training your brain to not just find shortcuts in the way that you have sort of in a way that's become habituated, makes it easier to say like, oh, okay, well, this connection to this particular habit is kind of in flux, and so now I have an opportunity to insert a new
Yeah.
practice, a new
Uncoupling them, right? Like,
uncoupling them, right? And it can be simple things, but it allows it to be a little bit more approachable, because that's not the only one thing that's changing. I really kind of find that to be fun.
and it does feel really good when you do that, right? Super accomplished, even though it's a small thing. Like, oh, I took a supplement that I haven't been able to manage to take every day for the last 3 months. That's my own personal thing.
Me too.
I've been like staring at the bottle, going, oh, any day now, one of these days, and then I just feel super accomplished that I've done it like 5 days in a row.
Yeah.
Um,
True.
but you're right about handing all of it over to us, and allowing your practitioners who are in your life, whether it's a physician, a nutritionist, health coach, whoever it has to be, letting them help you unpack it and sort it out and put it into the right columns and that kind of thing. I think patients are so not used to that, because the transactional nature of the healthcare system, like you got 10 minutes, you're gonna da da da, you got and people aren't used to like anything else, anything else, anything else. What else do they're used to just that one problem, and that's all you get. And so, yeah, this process of working with a functional medicine doctor or integrative medicine doctor or a provider of any type, really is a totally different experience, and that we're looking for the whole story, like every bit of it. We want to
Yeah.
know all of it, and then that really helps inform how we understand you and how we move forward in helping you. It's all important.
Yeah, we use the symptoms as the tip of the iceberg to help us understand, where to put our energy sort of initially, especially when it comes to behavioral health, anxiety, depression, trauma. The traditional model is very much like, well, you don't feel good, let's give you something that will make you feel better. And that, has a place and a benefit for many, many, many people. But it is clearly, one avenue, and not really, giving attention to the underlying processes. So someone with anxiety, it can be related to, childhood experiences in terms of, what was it like in the home? What were your family's interactions like? Did you live with one one or both parents? Like, what did you witness? Were you emotionally able to process, like, or did you feel support whenever you had something, that was awry? Because those patterns then sort of find their way into adulthood too. If you did not have a place to, feel supported emotionally, we as younger people find our own way, and that might be insert habit here. So it helps to like understand sort of the beginning, but then like what's going on hormonally, what's going on nutritionally, what is your gut, how are you digesting, how are you interacting with the energy and the abundance that's coming into this earth? Food is information, and food is energy, and it either is helpful or it's a little deterring. So getting into details of food as it relates to you is really important. And then lifestyle, how do you spend your free time? Who do you tend to connect with? What you do if you're idle? Because sometimes we're just bored and we're driven to things, but boredom is, sort of a cry for creative, needs, right? Like we are bored, like there's so many things, that you can do to sort of shift that. And so, I love that process of figuring out all of those things, or how do you metabolize your neurotransmitters or your hormones, like how our body interacts with a lot of these chemicals and molecules has everything to do with how we see the world. And it's a big paradigm shift to take a
Absolutely.
symptom and then see it played out in all of these different ways.
So true. Like to dumb it down to like the entire world is somehow has insufficient amounts of serotonin between their neurons. Shocking to me, and the fact that that didn't play out very well in the research either. Like none of these medications are particularly that much better than placebo.
Placebo.
So yeah, there's so much opportunity, I think, and I think people who are seeking this kind of care really are looking for like, if I just push the symptoms down, I'm really just pushing the same problem down, and eventually it'll show up over here. It's like a game of whack-a-mole, or it'll be just now I've put this medication in place, and now I have to deal with the side effects of that. And now that's introducing new problems. I take a serotonin medication and I have a libido that goes south, and now I'm having marital issues or relationship issues. It just all kind of goes in a cycle of, and that's not to say that those medications aren't important. They certainly are. And all medications have their role, but just digging a little bit deeper, I think, can really solve some of these issues, and how totally refreshing it is to hear, and I know this because I know you and I know functional medicine, but just to hear somebody talk about like the deep humanness of, the intake process and how you're thinking about people and how you're asking the questions that you're asking. That's medicine. That in and of itself is medicine.
It is medicine to take a journey into your own history to unlock potentials for your future. I mean, all the while working on the present. I mean, it's a tall order, but it's, we do it together. We're partners at that point. And I like your point too. I don't vilify traditional medicine. I don't vilify the SSRIs as you said as well. I think sometimes we do need chemical assistance to sort of, take the heavy wet blanket off and allow us to implement some of these things, depending on where we are. But the goal is to, work from imbalances from the roots up. I use the tree analogy a lot. And in functional medicine and integrative medicine and even Ayurveda, the root, is our digestion. It's our interface with our energetic world. But I kind of add on spiritual health to that, and not like spiritual that, not religion necessarily, just this whole meaning of understanding that you're, part of this world in a way that is meaningful. It starts from there, and then we kind of work with, adrenal gland stress, and then we work with, thyroid and other hormones, and we sort of like each, step of the way find more and more ways to just balance things out, and just it's phenomenal to see people's behaviors change and feelings and moods, and just to get their lives back. We do those questionnaires, which is so beautiful to see, like, well, this is where it started, and now like here we are. And with very little abrasive intervention, it's really just nourishing and Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. Um, well, this is a little bit of a switch in topic, but you've brought it up a few times, and I'm going to put this on you. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
I'm just interested if you could give us just a sort of brief. I know this is kind of unfair because it's a huge topic, but a brief primer of Ayurvedic medicine. Talk
Okay.
about that
Yes.
just a little bit. Because I'm sure that there are people who are listening to this who have no idea what that is or don't really know. They've heard of it, but they don't really know exactly what that means. So maybe just
Love it.
about the doshas and just give us an overview of kind of how it
Sure.
works.
Yeah, it's very pertinent to
Yeah,
spring cleaning
it
and spiritual
totally is.
and
That's why I
transition.
want you to talk about it.
Yeah, I love it. So Ayurvedic medicine is a basically a system of life that was rooted in India, so long ago. And it's not medicine in the traditional context of like, you go to a doctor and you interface. I mean, it can be. There are Ayurvedic doctors and practitioners, but really it's a model for understanding how our physical and emotional bodies, energetic bodies live in this world. That's a little ambiguous. I'll break it down. There are three what are called constitutions or doshas or prakritis, and um, these are sort of descriptions of qualities of one's self, and that means physical and emotional qualities like one's prone to anxiety versus prone to sort of lethargy, or prone to insomnia versus prone to hypersomnia, like too much sleep, or prone to wet and moist and prone to dry and rough.
Mm.
um it could be, we're talking about skin, but we're also talking about things like mucus and things like processes in the body. So it they're derived from elemental connections in the cosmos, right? So air, water, fire, these are elements that sort of create the separate constitutions, and we all exhibit qualities of all three, but we tend to have a predominant dosha or two. Some people are very, very special and they're tridoshic, and that's very cool.
That's like a
um,
gold medal winner right
yeah,
there.
yeah, you've got them all. It's wonderful. But there's nothing, and the good thing about it too is that there is no good or bad in that
Right,
process. It sort
totally.
of just is, you
Yeah.
are what you are. And I love that too, because it's a very liberating thing to understand that like you are one that has just a vulnerability to this. That's not like anxiety defines you. It's just that you're one who's prone to it. And so XYZ or lifestyle practices that can prevent you from, spinning a little bit into the world of anxiety. And so it's all about finding balances within your own constitution. And so each season has an associated sort of dosha as well, like elemental qualities about it. So spring is a kapha season, which is kind of moist, a lot of rain and heavy. The earth is abundant and rich. Kaphas are nurturing and loving and warm. But kapha energy can also get very stuck. And coming from winter, there's a stuckness, a heaviness, a sort of a mucus quality to it. And so from an Ayurvedic perspective, going from winter to spring, the idea is to do things that sort of lighten your energy, essentially. So, taking walks and eating a little less of the rooted vegetables, which is what we need in winter and fall, which is more vata season.
Yeah.
And eating kind of lighter food, still cooked a little bit, but a little lighter fare in general. These are just some ways to interact with it. But what I love about it is that it destigmatizes like your shape and your size and your particular ailments, like so. But the people that taught me about this, the practitioners that were like, well, what if I don't want to be a kapha? Or, what if I don't want to be vata?
Yes.
Like, it's
Yeah.
nothing about that. We do as a culture idealize a certain like, shape, size,
Yep.
way of being. But it's really not about that. It's sort of just helping you understand yourself from a really elemental perspective, and then find balance by recognizing things spiraling out of control. So as a very short example, so there's kapha, pitta, and vata. I relate to the vata dosha quite a bit, which is someone who is kind of quick, like air is the element, air and ether are the elements of Vata. So a lot of quick moving and fast paced, and ability to, connect very quickly or learn very quickly, but also forget very quickly. And because of that airy nature, transitions and moves and too much commotion can be aggravating. And so Vatas are prone to anxiety and insomnia. So how do I balance this? I had to think about this when I moved here to Wisconsin. Like, how am I going to balance the cold, dry winter? Root vegetables, grounded practice, hot yoga practice, or things that sort of, balance this quality.
Anchor you a little bit to the earth.
We could write. And then kaphas, on the other hand, like, maybe need a little bit of this. And pitas are really fiery and very focused, but pitas need to breathe. Like,
you tell by my sweater.
The red sweater, right? Pitas need to breathe, pitas need to kind of simmer a touch, because pitas are very fiery, and we have to do that to prevent a lot of burnout in any one direction. And so I love having that conversation with patients that are interested in learning about their own dosha, because it also helps to, just by doing the questionnaire, you get a really good idea of how these elemental pieces can play a role in your life. We all know it, like, somebody's always getting a bronchial infection versus somebody who's always getting UTIs versus someone who's always getting sinus congestion. These are vulnerable spaces, and they interface with our genetics. It interfaces with our lifestyle, so our epigenetics.
Yep.
And it creates the lovely person that we are. But in an effort to clean out the closet and find balance, season transitions are a good place for you to remind yourself where you are and what kind of things can sort of allow that to happen a little bit more smoothly.
Right. And I love the way that you painted that picture with the lack of self-judgment that I think we're so prone to in our culture, striving for some sort of physical ideal, or I think even in certain parts of the culture, comparing oneself to the other folks in the neighborhood or whatever, and feeling less than, or different than. This is that opportunity to go like, okay, my genetics are such, my Ayurvedic constitution is such, my personality relates to both of those things, and my life experiences have shaped that. And wow, that's me. As opposed to, well, I wish I didn't have this, and this would be great if I didn't, blah blah blah. Just to be able to remove that, like, that yoke of like self deprecation that we do to ourselves. It gets in our way of really being able to just accept, hey, I've got this dosha. I mean, I'm a fire sign. I'm a Sagittarius. I'm a Pitta, this is my personality. This is who I am. And just to be able to embrace that and what it looks like physically, emotionally, without judgment. Now, that's not to say that I don't judge myself. I do often.
We do, and that can be a driver. It can,
totally.
to look at yourself critically can be a driver. I think there's just a very fine line between deleterious self-critique and constructive investigation to the self. But we do, I think, have this idea of the grass is always greener. And I think it's an important one to kind of, and again, Ayurvedic practice is all about understanding our place on this earth, in this cosmos, right? So it allows us to sort of pan out from the day-to-days of our like little intricacies of details of busyness that we find ourselves in, and just really connect with the earth in a different way. I mean, some of the most popular supplements that we use are from Ayurvedic practice, ashwagandha, which is something that helps with stress regulation, triphala, which helps with digestion. The Ayurvedic paradigm is very much like how to create optimal function of this vessel. And the practice comes with a lot of commitment. Like, it's one thing to wake up and breathe for 5 minutes before you start your day, but Ayurvedic practitioners will, there's several things. It's the panchakarma, it's the abhyanga. There's dry brushing and oil pulling and self massage with certain oils, and there's pranayama breathing, and then there's yoga asana, and there's like eating in a certain way and waking up in a certain way. Again, all to service you. I mean, it's a lot. But there's a lot of really great pieces about how to keep this whole thing moving and flowing and balanced. And there's a lot to learn from it.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be the whole shebang. And I don't count myself as an Ayurvedic practitioner at all, but I know about it. I mean, I've studied it, and it's interesting to me. and I've applied it to myself in certain situations. But I recently had a patient who was struggling with some very kapha-like symptoms,
Mhm.
recurrent sinus congestion, constipation, some things that were just all kind of pointing to that. Is so I was listening to the story, I'm kind of like, this is like kapha to me. And without getting too far in Ayurvedic, I said, you might want to just learn about this and maybe just start taking into some consideration some of the nutritional ideas, because she was very willing to eat differently, and like try to change out some foods and whatever. And yeah, I mean, just making some really small nutritional shifts made a big difference, interestingly.
Yeah, and it changes with every season
Yeah.
too. And so again, it's every season is an opportunity to sort of figure out, okay, like, what do I eat for this period of the year that promotes optimal digestion? Ayurvedic philosophy also believes in, eating at certain times of the day. So another one of those concepts of spring cleaning can sometimes include, fasting, which is a process that, cultures and religions have been doing for so long for a variety of reasons. I mean, Ramadan is going on currently, and Islam is a month long of fasting every day. There's a lot of benefit to it, but also in order to sort of allow your digestive fire, your Agni, to break things down and move that energy through the body. It's all very intrinsic to Ayurveda. So um, I really enjoy the perspective of that it can offer
Yeah, it's cool.
to the whole picture.
That's really, really cool. Well, maybe we'll end this with like top two or three takeaways. Like maybe not necessarily something that we've talked about already,
Okay.
or it could be. But like if you were going to give somebody like, here's three things you can do, or here's two things you can do right now to prepare yourself for moving into spring, feeling better. Um, Give me some ideas, and I'll throw some out too for my perspective.
Sure. Okay, so I guess the first is something we talked about, which is to set an intention to switch things up in a habitual sort of way, like, and introduce a new approachable habit that allows you to sort of recommit to yourself during the transition. I think that that's one of the first, is sort of to, get that commitment going. Move in any way that you could potentially move, and take a moment to reflect on areas of your life that are still in progress, and start to investigate some of the barriers that get in the way.
Mm.
um, I mean, there's so many more,
I know.
Tiffany. Yeah.
Some of the ones I'm thinking about, like, and I'm going to piggyback off that last one that you just said, which is the barriers. And so, what I think is so important, what I've thought for myself, and I've seen this with other patients and family members and friends, is really examining relationships and looking at what relationships are bringing you, and it's not that, I find some of my relationships that are the hardest ones to be sort of the most beneficial in many ways, because they teach me something about myself, they make me a better person. But where are the relationships that are just not working? Like, could you spring clean those? And it doesn't necessarily have to be like calling somebody up and saying, I'm never talking to you again. It could just be making a decision to say, I'm not going to go out of my way to seek that person's company, or I'm not going to worry about, the fact that I haven't talked to that person in 6 months or whatever.
Right.
So that, and then there's two other sort of practical ones that came to mind to me. And one is, and then these are things that I'm actually going to do. One is going out into nature during this time.
Mhm.
Uh, there's something about that really bright green color as the leaves start to open. It's almost like blinding. It's so bright green. And when you're in a place like a forest, when that's happening, it just feels like there's suddenly more oxygen, and the sun is obviously coming at a different angle. And so it really lights that up. And when I think about that, that makes me so happy. So I'm going to, when the leaves start to emerge again, the green starts to come back, I'm going to make a concerted effort to go back into nature. And I'm not going to do it every day or even every week, but I'm going to try to do that more regularly.
I love that
So that's movement and, being outside and
connection. Mhm.
yeah, connection, getting some vitamin D. And the other thing was, I've, for like more than 10 years, this is almost embarrassing, but more than 10 years, I have been putting off getting light blocking shades in my bedroom. And every spring, when it starts to become light at like 4 in the morning, as we move to summer, I'm like reminded that I still didn't get to those, light blockers. So I think if you're one of those people whose bedroom does not have good darkness for sleep, this is a good thing about doing that.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh,
Oh,
my
thanks.
eye mask was like, I have light darkening shades, but not above the bed. And the eye mask was
Oh,
like,
or get an
that was
iMac. Yeah,
that was why I had to, it gave me
totally.
some, yeah, wiggle room to actually get the whole window fixtures in
No,
order. But
that works just as well. You don't have to invest in blinds, especially if you're a renter or something. You don't want to invest in it. But like, yeah, a good eye mask goes a long way too.
it really
Really
does. I love
capital
that.
sleep. Yeah.
And I want to kind of just make a comment about what you mentioned about relationships. I just finished reading the book. It's called The Good Life, and it's written by the researchers that are doing the Harvard-based like longest longitudinal study on human happiness.
Oh, cool. Who wrote that? Do you know?
It's so cool. I know it's Mark and Bob, that I forget their last names because they keep
They also
referring
run
to
a
them as
restaurant.
Mark and Bob. Yeah, they wrote them. I'll have to look at their last names, but they, basically in conclusion, and this was like, it started with Harvard male graduates, so obviously socioeconomic parameters were somewhat limited, and then over the years they've kind of expanded this cross-culturally and to different countries. And really the thesis of the book is that it's all about our relationships. It's all about our connections with one another. And it really gave me, I'm a very social person and I like to be around people a lot. But it reminded me of really finding appreciation and gratitude for relationships that are nourishing and warm and supportive, of who you are. Sometimes it's hard to make changes, like eat differently or engage in social situations differently. And those that support you in every facet of your changes are very meaningful connections. So it just allowed me to remind myself of not to be complacent about reaching out to the friend that I haven't talked to in a long
Yeah,
time that
totally.
always makes me smile. There's a lot of cool practical exercises in it where it sort of reminds you what this value is. That so many people at the end of their life that were studied for 50 years on 60, 70 years on this plan or in this study, as they age, they were like, these are the things that were the most important. And that includes like the people you work with. It includes the people you interact with. And like you mentioned, challenging relationships, like, it doesn't have to be, we spend so much of our time at work, so many
Yeah,
of us. And
absolutely.
sometimes there's that one person that, things are, but if you can find a way to connect and find compassion for people's stories, you can really change your environment that is sometimes toxic or sometimes troubling. So it's a really nice reminder that it's all about our relationship with one
Yeah,
another.
that's amazing. That's
Yeah,
awesome. And love me a good book recommendation.
yeah, The Good Life, yeah,
Steve
by
and I
Bob and
both
Mark.
have book issues. Look at
Yeah, well,
that. But
I mean,
that's only half of it. You can't see the bottom half, and you can't see the other half of Seema's room. I know.
I may have a problem. I
There.
mean, I just really like them. Yeah.
Well, I have such gratitude for you and our relationship, and I'm so glad that you are part of Vital Health and that the patients that see you have access to your incredible knowledge and compassion. And so, thank you for spending time with us today and
Thank you.
lending your wisdom. You are an amazing doc and an amazing human, and I appreciate you.
Well, I right back at you. I just feel very blessed to have connected with you. And of course, it was all of the ways of the world that allowed for that, which, obviously bring people together that are trying to, put forth just, more health and happiness for all and good compassion in the world. And I appreciate you creating this space for us to do this and to connect with people and to really practice medicine in the way that it's meant to be practiced. So
Agreed.
I'm blessing and I'm
Amen,
like,
sister.
amen.
Amen to you.
All right.
Thank
Well,
you
thank
so
you
much.
so much.
Thanks, everybody. Talk soon.
Bye.